Mr. Roets, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us and a warm welcome to SA Today.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Good to be on the show.
Well, in as much as AfriForum has expressed delight at the court judgment, I suppose then that excitement will be short-lived considering that former President Jacob Zuma has now filed an appeal, because the scales could tip either way.
Yes, well, if there's one thing that former President Jacob Zuma is very good at, it's at filing appeals. So we're not at all surprised that he has filed appeal. And as a matter of fact, we've discussed it with our legal team, how we are going to respond to the appeal even before the appeal was filed. So it was no surprise to us. And we have already decided earlier today that we will oppose the appeal. And not only will we argue, we are absolutely convinced that this appeal is a waste of time. It's going to waste the court's time. It's going to be a waste of resources. There's not a reasonable chance that it would succeed. So we're going to argue that the appeal shouldn't even be heard in the first place.
Well, you've raised concerns that there are double standards in the South African legal system and that senior politicians or people perhaps with political connections are not treated the same as the rest of the public. While on the other hand, Mr. Zuma says that he suffers gross injustice at the hands of the unjust system that should not have imprisoned him in the first place. So I suppose that there's various contestation with regards to how people or how different entities look at the justice system and how justice is being carried out.
Yes, well, people who are going to jail or who are in jail will always find very creative arguments as to why they have been mistreated by the justice system. So obviously, former President Jacob Zuma would say that, and obviously someone like Carl Niehaus would rush to his defense. That doesn't change the fact that he did commit a crime. And that there was a court proceeding which found him guilty of contempt of court, and it doesn't change the fact that he was sentenced to 15 months in prison, and it doesn't change the fact that the requirements for medical parole was not complied with, which is why this decision to release him from prison was unlawful, and this is what was overturned today, and this is also why he has to return to prison.
Now, take us through AfriForum's stance and position and application in the Gauteng High Court leading to this particular ruling. Everybody wants to know what's AfriForum's interest in this.
Yes, well, AfriForum is a civil rights organization. We have just below 300,000 members of the public, members of the public who contribute to our work, who support what we are doing. And this, to us, is obviously a high interest matter because of the underlying issues here in terms of how does a legal system treat a former president. It's something that goes to the core of civil rights and accountable government. And what we've been arguing in prison is actually exactly what the court ruled today, which is that the decision to release former President Jacob Zuma on medical parole was unlawful for the reason that there are certain and there are very particular requirements that have to be complied with for someone to be released on medical parole. These were not complied with. It was very clear from the beginning that former President Jacob Zuma is not terminally ill, that he doesn't comply with the other criteria for medical parole. And this was substantiated by the fact that the Medical Parole Board even said that he shouldn't get medical parole. They did not recommend medical parole. So he only got medical parole because he's Jacob Zuma. We all know that. That's what we argued in court, and that's what the court has ruled today as well.
And speaking of terminal illness, Zuma's lawyers are now arguing that, the order to return to prison amounts to cruel and degrading punishment with no due regard to the patient's healthcare, dignity and other human rights. It is the antithesis of Ubuntu. Then it goes back to the rise or the medical rise. Is it perhaps the fact that we all don't know what kind of illness that is afflicting Mr. Jacob Zuma?
Well, what we do know is that he was studied by, there was an investigation by medical doctors. We do know that the Medical Parole Board has reached the conclusion that based on his medical condition, he does not comply with the requirements for medical parole. And that already states it quite clearly. You don't only, and just to be fair, it's not only terminal illness that can have you granted medical parole. But the fact of the matter is you cannot simply argue that if you are in prison and you are sick, then you have to come out of prison, and you have to get medical parole, because the prison system can also look after people who are sick. You have to be extremely sick, and you have to be so sick that it's not possible for the system to take care of you due to your medical circumstances. And this is not applicable, clearly not, in terms of Jacob Zuma. We know, again, it goes back to the fact that the reason why he was granted medical parole was because he is Jacob Zuma, because he was given preferential treatment. It's quite clear from the facts. It was argued in court. It's quite clear from the fact that the medical parole board recommended that he should not get medical parole, but despite that, he actually got it. So if there is an injustice, the Jacob Zuma Foundation and Carl Niehaus and Jacob Zuma's spokesperson, they are right in saying that there is an injustice that was committed here. It's just not the injustice that they think it is. The injustice is the fact that he was released without having complied with the requirements for medical parole.
Now, Mr. Roets, if we go back to history, some former apartheid leaders have refused to apologize and take responsibility for their atrocities and were never jailed for actions that were declared crimes against humanity. So in this particular case, the former president, he served his sentence as ordered. Why is it so important? Well, as some Zuma supporters may opine, why is it so important for you to see this 80-year-old pensioner going back to jail?
Well, it's important for us for justice to be served, to make sure that justice is upheld in this matter. If he is complied, or if the law says he has to go to jail, the point for us is just that he cannot not go to jail because he is Jacob Zuma. That just means that there's double standards, there's discrimination, and so forth. And again, just to comment on the point, yes, South Africa has a very controversial history of atrocities and so forth, but there were also atrocities committed by people in the ANC, leadership of the ANC. Former President Jacob Zuma himself has boasted about his relationship with Andrew Zondo, who murdered 5 innocent people. He hasn't gone to prison for that. So in that sense, we can also argue that, or he hasn't gone to prison for his involvement with that. So we can also argue, we can make that argument both sides to say that there were atrocities in the past for which people have not been served justice.
All right, Mr. Roets, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us.